From as early as I could remember, the word failure clung to me like a shadow. My family had built an empire of success: lawyers, doctors, influential entrepreneurs, each member shining brighter than the last. Yet, from the moment I learned to walk, it seemed I was always a step behind, stumbling in the shadows cast by their towering achievements. Unlike my siblings, whose trophies crowded every shelf and whose certificates wallpapered the halls of our sprawling family home, my modest efforts seemed insignificant, almost laughable. Every family dinner was a spectacle, each relative parading their accolades as if my failures made their victories taste sweeter. I would watch silently from my corner of the table, eyes lowered, heart aching. My parents. Disappointment wasn't subtle. They meant well done, of course. They always insisted they pushed me for my own good. But their criticisms felt like shards of glass. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" My mother would sigh, her voice dripping with pity and subtle disdain. My father would nod silently, his eyes carrying an unspoken judgment I had long learned to decipher. Their words and expressions, well-intentioned or not, were etched into my soul, each one a scar that refused to fade. My siblings, the golden children of our dynasty, watched me struggle with an uncomfortable blend of sympathy and embarrassment, treating me like the family's eternal charity case. School wasn't much kinder. Teachers, recognizing my surname, would expect brilliance and poise. When they discovered my shortcomings, their smiles would tighten, their patience thinning with every mistake. Report cards were handed out with sympathetic glances and whispered conversations. I was known less by my name and more by my consistent inadequacies. Friends became acquaintances, drifting away when they realized my family's high reputation didn't extend to me. Loneliness wrapped around me like a blanket, familiar, suffocating, and ever-present. Still, I clung desperately to a quiet hope that someday, somehow, I'd break free. As I grew older, I learned to wear my label like armor. If they saw me as a failure, then I'd at least embrace it defiantly. I'd stop defending myself or trying to prove them wrong. Instead, I let their whispers wash over me, their judgments fueling an inner fire that simmered silently beneath layers of defeat and disappointment. Little did they know. Every word, every dismissive glance was adding to a reservoir of quiet strength within me, a strength that would one day surface with unstoppable force. Yet no one noticed my resilience. No one saw past the carefully crafted image of inadequacy I'd allowed them to cultivate. I moved through life seemingly unchanged, still the failure, still the child who'd never quite fit into their gleaming narrative. But inside, piece by piece, I was preparing for something bigger, something unexpected. Because the universe, as unpredictable and mysterious as it was, had other plans. And when that day came, no one, not my family, not my friends, would see it coming. The years rolled by, each one a quiet echo of the last, filled with unmet expectations and subtle humiliations. As my siblings soared into their shining futures, I drifted, caught in a current of self-doubt. But something curious happened when life stripped away every false sense of pride. I discovered clarity. I stopped striving to please those who'd never truly see me, accepting that their perception of me was unchangeable. Ironically, it was this surrender that began to free me. Behind the scenes, unnoticed by my family, I started my own quiet journey, determined to build something genuine, something entirely mine. I'd realized that perhaps my strength lay in their blind spots. Every evening after my unremarkable job, a simple position in an obscure bookstore, I would immerse myself in books, courses, and endless learning. These were my hidden worlds, my quiet rebellions. Between stacks of forgotten novels and dusty manuals, I was reshaping myself, reconstructing the very essence of who I could become. It wasn't glamorous or heroic, but it felt profound. Here, away from their scrutinizing eyes and judgmental whispers, I finally understood that true strength wasn't necessarily loud. Sometimes, it was quiet, steady, and invisible. Despite my growing inner resolve, the world around me hadn't changed. Holidays, birthdays, and family gatherings were still an exercise in emotional endurance. Each reunion was like reopening a wound, reminding me of the person I was supposed to be, yet could never quite become. Every laugh at my expense, every subtly mocking comment from an aunt or uncle reinforced their narrative. I was still the failure, the one they spoke about in hushed voices and pitiful tones. I endured it all silently, storing each painful moment deep inside, not out of defeat, but out of determination. One chilly autumn afternoon, everything shifted dramatically. My great Uncle Edmund, the one family member who always seemed to look at me with a curious blend of kindness and understanding, passed away. He had been distant, eccentric, a puzzle even to our accomplished family. But somehow, he'd always shown a quiet interest in my existence. His funeral was solemn, the atmosphere heavy with whispers about his substantial estate. As always, I stood slightly apart from the family circle, feeling out of place amid their polite yet competitive grief. No one noticed the small, quiet smile of the lawyer who watched me carefully from the shadows of the chapel. At that moment, I didn't realize the storm that was quietly brewing on the horizon. My family had unknowingly set the stage, and my Uncle Edmund, even from beyond the grave, was about to rewrite my story in ways I never dreamed possible. The wheels of fate had already begun turning, and soon, the truth they refused to see, the truth of my silent resilience and hidden worth, would be revealed. And when it finally happened, everything they knew about me would be shattered, replaced by something far more powerful, something they had always overlooked. Weeks after Uncle Edmund's funeral, life settled back into its routine, yet the memory lingered like a subtle, unresolved chord in my thoughts. On an ordinary Thursday afternoon, while shelving books in the quiet corner of the store, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I hesitated, feeling a peculiar sense of anticipation as I answered. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, yet oddly warm. It was Uncle Edmund's lawyer. My heart skipped a beat as he explained that my presence was required at the upcoming reading of Edmund's will. I felt my pulse quicken, a fluttering of disbelief mingling with cautious hope. Why me? The eternal disappointment. The day of the inheritance reading arrived like any other family gathering, tense and awkward. I could feel their questioning gazes as I entered the grand, wan, intimidating law office, clearly surprised that the failure had even been invited. Their eyes spoke volumes, silently accusing me of having no right to be there. I sat apart, my spine stiff with quiet dignity, though beneath the surface, my nerves were taut as wire. My family clustered together, discussing who would inherit Uncle Edmund's considerable wealth. Their confident predictions, their casual dismissal of my presence, filled the room with palpable tension. When the lawyer finally began speaking, he paused and glanced briefly in my direction, his gaze gentle yet strangely reassuring. Before we proceed, he began carefully, I must ask you all to listen with open minds and hearts. My siblings exchanged bemused looks, scoffing lightly, their skepticism evident. I breathed deeply, steadying myself, sensing something monumental was about to unfold. The lawyer cleared his throat once more, scanning the document. The silence that followed felt heavier, charged with invisible electricity. If this story is touching your heart, don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. It helps more people find stories like this. And then the lawyer read aloud words I never imagined I'd hear, words that shook the very foundation of everything my family believed about me. To my dear niece, whom this family has unjustly labeled as the failure, I leave not only the bulk of my fortune, but also my company, my estate, and control of all my business interests. His voice was steady, each syllable landing with the quiet force of an earthquake. The shock in the room was immediate and profound. Gasps punctured the air. Disbelief painted across every face except mine. For once, I felt calm, powerful even, as I finally met their eyes head-on. In the quiet that followed, I could almost hear the pieces of their assumptions crashing down around them. Yet, for the first time, their disbelief didn't sting. Instead, it empowered me, validated years of silent endurance. The lawyer looked directly at me and nodded gently. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't a failure. I was something far stronger. I had been underestimated, overlooked, forgotten, but never defeated. Now, finally, they would see the truth. In those few heartbeats following the announcement, I could feel the atmosphere shift dramatically, like an abrupt storm cloud rolling into a clear sky. My family's stunned silence quickly dissolved into confusion and disbelief. My sister's perfectly manicured hand flew to her mouth, eyes wide with shock. My brother's usually confident face turned pale, his jaw tightening in quiet anger. My parents, seated stiffly at the front, exchanged frantic whispers, their disbelief evident. Every face, every expression, confirmed one painful truth. None of them had ever imagined me capable of this kind of recognition or success. To them, I had always been invisible, unimportant, never a threat, never worthy of notice. Until now. As the initial shock faded, anger surfaced. My older brother was first to break the silence, demanding to see the will for himself, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. The lawyer calmly handed him the document. Watching him pore over every word, desperately searching for some loophole, I felt a peculiar blend of sadness and quiet satisfaction. My sister chimed in next, her voice sharp with accusation, suggesting perhaps there had been a mistake. Surely Edmund hadn't meant me. Her tone made my stomach tighten, yet my newfound strength remained unshaken. I had endured their dismissals for years. Today, their bitterness would not dim my moment. My parents remained quiet initially, their shock giving way to a mix of embarrassment and subtle resentment. My mother met my gaze for just a second, confusion and disappointment battling in her eyes. I recognized that look. She believed this inheritance was wasted on me, still seeing only the daughter who fell short of their expectations. My father, usually so composed, seemed uncertain, his pride clearly wounded. Seeing him, once so powerful in my eyes, humbled by this unexpected twist, was strangely sobering. It was clear he never imagined a world in which his least capable child would rise above their carefully constructed hierarchy. The lawyer, sensing the escalating tension, calmly interrupted, confirming that Uncle Edmund had been clear and decisive in his wishes. "He saw what you all refused to," he explained gently, his eyes meeting mine. "Strength often lies in silence and resilience, qualities your niece displayed quietly for years." His words echoed in the silence, validating every invisible battle I'd fought and won alone. My family sat frozen, forced to confront their misjudgment, yet unwilling to fully accept it. The bitter taste of their realization was clear, yet none of them could voice the apology I secretly hoped for. When the reading concluded, I stood and quietly left the room. I had no need to justify myself, no desire to linger in their awkward and accusatory stares. For the first time, their opinions didn't weigh heavily upon me. As I stepped into the hallway, breathing deeply, feeling lighter than ever before, a realization dawned on me. This was not just about an inheritance. It was about reclaiming my voice, my dignity, my worth. Today marked the beginning of a new chapter, a chance to rewrite my story, not as their failure, but as my own quiet victory. In the weeks following the inheritance reading, my family's bitterness only deepened. Invitations to gatherings abruptly ceased, replaced by whispers behind closed doors. I felt their silent punishment. Yet this time, Their rejection held no power over me. Embracing Uncle Edmund's legacy became my sole focus. Each morning, walking into his company, my company now, I felt empowered. The staff initially regarded me with suspicion, mirroring my family's doubts. But with each decisive step, every successful project, their skepticism slowly shifted to respect. I was transforming, no longer defined by past failures but by newfound resilience. My silent strength began earning the admiration I'd always crave. Months passed, and my confidence grew stronger, guided by Uncle Edmund's legacy. Then, one rainy afternoon, as I reviewed reports in my office, a hesitant knock interrupted me. I looked up, startled to see my mother standing at the doorway, nervous and unsure, far from her usual poised demeanor. She came in quietly, her eyes filled with a vulnerability I'd never seen before. Her voice trembled as she spoke, admitting regret for the years of judgment, for never truly seeing me. Though her words couldn't erase decades of hurt, they stirred something deep inside. For the first time, I realized healing might be possible, not from their approval, but from my own forgiveness. In the weeks after my mother's visit, something subtle but powerful changed within me. Though our relationship remained fragile, her acknowledgement began repairing years of silent wounds. Slowly, cautiously, I allowed her back into my life, not as the authoritative figure whose approval I once desperately sought, but as a flawed person, genuinely trying to reconnect. Meanwhile, my siblings still held their grudges firmly. They saw our reconciliation as betrayal, further isolating me from family events. But their bitterness couldn't overshadow my quiet victories. I no longer needed their validation to define my worth. I had finally become my own anchor. A year passed swiftly, filled with challenges and achievements. Under my guidance, Edmund's company thrived, exceeding all expectations. News spread quickly, highlighting the former family failure, who had quietly built a remarkable legacy. My siblings' hostility gradually softened into reluctant respect, though pride kept them from openly acknowledging it. Public recognition came often now, awards, interviews, and glowing articles celebrating my quiet triumph. Each accolade was another stitch in the fabric of my redemption, reminding the world and myself that labels could never define a person's true potential. I had finally become more than they ever imagined, and for once, their opinions didn't matter. It was my father's birthday, and despite everything, I received an invitation, addressed formally, as if I were a guest, rather than his daughter. I debated attending, but ultimately chose to go, not for them, but for me. Walking into that familiar house, I felt different, powerful, composed. My siblings watched from across the room, quiet now, their laughter subdued. Conversations paused as I entered, all eyes turning. This time, I didn't shrink. I stood tall. My father greeted me with a cautious nod, a forced smile. We spoke briefly, awkwardly, but the underlying tension couldn't erase the quiet shift of power in the room. I no longer felt small. I felt seen. As the evening unfolded, I found myself standing by the grand piano, surrounded by people who once dismissed me. One of my father's friends approached and asked how I had managed to turn things around. The question wasn't malicious, it was genuine. For the first time, I spoke openly about the years of silence, the hurt, the strength it took to rise from their shadows. The room grew quiet. Even my siblings listened. I didn't speak with anger or spite, just truth. My voice was calm, steady, and undeniable. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. I was simply being heard. And that, after all the years of invisibility, was the greatest power of all. After that night, the tone within my family shifted. There were no dramatic apologies, no grand reconciliations, but something unspoken lingered, an acknowledgement. They no longer called me the failure. They no longer questioned my place in the room. And while some still kept their distance, I could see it in their eyes. Regret, reflection, and a quiet admiration they couldn't articulate. I didn't need vengeance. The silence was enough. The respect that once felt impossible was now real. My justice hadn't come from revenge. It had come from becoming everything they said I couldn't, and doing it without ever needing to humiliate them. That, to me, was power. Now, when I look in the mirror, I no longer see the girl who begged to be seen. I see a woman who rebuilt herself from the ashes of neglect, who turned whispered insults into stepping stones. The inheritance didn't define me. What I did with it did. I've created scholarships in Uncle Edmund's name, started mentorship programs for women who, like me, were once silenced. My story isn't just mine anymore. It's a reminder that failure isn't a label, it's a chapter. And I chose to write a new ending. They once called me the failure. But today, my name stands for strength, legacy, and silent revenge. Thanks for watching until the end. If you've lived through something similar, share your story in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss our next silent revenge. Because sometimes, silence is the loudest scream.